All right, let's dive in. Today we're going deep into Genesis chapter 12
Ooh, okay.
from the King James Version.
All right.
And to add a little extra something, we've also got some commentary from Matthew Henry, who was a theologian from the 1700s.
Oh, cool. So we're going to get like a historical perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Like how interpretations have evolved over time.
Mm-hmm. That's going to be really fascinating.
So Genesis 12 introduces us to Abram.
Okay.
And Abram gets a pretty major, life-changing call from God.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we're talking like a serious leave your comfort zone situation.
Right. Like a drop everything and go kind of a thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So God tells Abram to leave his home, his family, everything he knows,
Wow.
and go to a new land that God's going to show him.
Talk about leap of faith, right?
Yeah, sure.
Especially, because it's not just about the journey.
Right.
God making him some pretty big promises, too.
Like what kind of promises?
Well, God says that Abram's going to become the father of a great nation. He's going to have more blessings than he can count. He'll be protected.
Whoa.
And his legacy will impact the whole world.
I mean, that's a pretty incredible offer, right?
It is. Like, if I got that voicemail, I think I'd have to listen to it a couple times just to make sure I heard it right.
Uh-huh. Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
But Abram doesn't even hesitate, even though he's 75 years old at this point.
Wow, 75. That's even more impressive.
I know, right? He just gathers his wife Sarai, his nephew, all their stuff,
Wow.
and they head out.
It really makes you wonder, like, what must have been going through his head
I know.
to just drop everything and follow this call.
And as they're traveling, Abram does something pretty interesting.
Oh, what's that?
Well, he builds these altars to God.
Altars. Okay.
Yeah, everywhere they stop.
Mm-hmm.
Like at Sikkim, the plain of Morah.
Interesting. It's like he's marking his territory, wouldn't you say?
I never thought of it like that, but
Yeah.
it makes sense. Especially back then, in ancient cultures. Building an altar was a public thing, it wasn't just a personal thing.
Exactly. It was like a declaration, right? A statement of faith.
Yeah.
And in Matthew Henry's commentary, he talks about how this was Abram establishing a spiritual foundation in this new land. Because God promised him this huge nation, right? So maybe these altars were like symbolic cornerstones.
Oh, that's a cool way to look at it.
Yeah, it adds a whole other layer to the story, don't you think?
Definitely. But as you know, with any good story, there's got to be some conflict,
Oh,
right?
of course. What happens?
Well, there's a famine in Canaan,
Oh, no.
so Abram decides to take his family to Egypt.
Okay. Makes sense. Gotta find food.
Right. But you'd think after all those blessings from God, he'd be feeling pretty confident in his faith.
Yeah, you'd think so.
But this is where things get a little, human.
Oh. What do you mean?
Abram gets scared, and he comes up with a plan that's not exactly honest.
Oh.
He tells Sarai to pretend to be his sister.
His sister. Why would he do that?
He's afraid that the Egyptians will kill him if they know Sarai's his wife, because she's really beautiful.
So fear's got him making some questionable choices.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's ironic, isn't it?
It is. You'd think after all that, his faith wouldn't be shaken by a famine.
Right. But as Matthew Henry points out, even people chosen by God can be flawed,
True. It kind of makes Abram a little more relatable.
Yeah, for sure.
So what happens next? Does the plan work?
Well, Pharaoh sees Sarai, and of course he's smitten. He takes her in and gives Abram all sorts of gifts and riches.
Wow. So it seems like Abram got away with it.
Well, not quite. God's not too happy about this whole deception thing.
No.
He sends plagues down on Pharaoh and his whole household.
Yikes.
And that's how the truth about Sarai comes out.
So much for that plan, huh? I guess you can't really fool God.
Nope. But it makes you wonder, how's Pharaoh going to react to all of this?
Right. To being lied to like that. I'm kind of curious myself.
Well, he's definitely not happy about it. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
He doesn't punish Abram. He actually sends Abram and Sarai away with all their possessions.
Really? That's surprising.
I know, right? It's like he sees that there's something bigger going on here, some divine intervention maybe.
It's pretty interesting. It makes you think about how we react when we've been lied to.
Yeah, for sure. Like, would we be so forgiving? Yeah, it does make you think. I mean, me, personally, I'd be pretty upset.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But Pharaoh, he just sends them on their way.
And Abram's story doesn't end there.
Oh, definitely not. This is just the beginning.
He goes on to become
Yeah.
like this huge figure, right?
Huge. I mean, he's the ancestor of so many people, like the Israelites.
So it's not just some random story. It has this major impact.
Absolutely. And remember that promise God made.
But Abram's descendants blessing the whole world.
Yeah, that one. When you think about how his family grows into, well, nations, really. It's not just about Abram and his immediate family anymore, is it?
No, it's way bigger than that.
It's like this whole plan is unfolding, God's working through Abram.
Yeah, it's like Abram's a prototype or something for how God's going to interact with humanity.
Exactly. So what stands out to you about this story?
Well, I got to say, Abram's faith is just, wow. I mean, to leave everything behind like that.
It's incredible.
Based on a promise, that takes some serious trust.
For sure. And he doesn't question it, He just obeys.
But it wasn't always easy for him, though.
Right. Oh, yeah. Remember that whole Egypt thing?
Yeah, where he basically told Sarai to lie.
That shows that even the most faithful people can have their doubts and make mistakes.
It makes the story feel more real,
Totally. And it's where God's grace comes in.
Right. Like even when Abram messed up.
Yeah, when he tried to, control the situation.
God didn't just abandon him.
No, he protected him, guided him. And in the end, Abram's still safe and prosperous.
It's almost like God saying, look, you're going to make mistakes. You're human.
Right. But I'm still here for you.
I love that. It's really reassuring, Like we all mess up sometimes.
All the time. So thinking about that, how do you see this story applying to our lives today?
That's a good question. I think we all have those moments where we're called to step out in faith.
Yeah, like our own personal Canaans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's scary,
Yeah.
But we have to trust.
And we all have times when we're weak, when fear takes over.
Like Abram in Egypt.
Exactly. But his story shows that even when we falter, God's grace is there to get us back on track.
So speaking of grace, what about Matthew Henry's commentary on this whole episode?
Oh, yeah. He had some interesting stuff to say.
I remember you mentioned he saw Abram's actions as like building a spiritual foundation.
Right. He believed that God chose Abram to preserve true worship.
Until Christ came.
Exactly. And he saw Abram's journey as like a foreshadowing of the spiritual journeys we all go through.
Okay, I'm following. But what did he mean by true worship?
Good question. It's something that's been discussed for centuries, really.
Right.
But for Henry, it was more than just rituals or going through the motions, you know? It was about a real, genuine connection with God.
Okay.
A willingness to surrender to his will and to live your life following his commands.
So for Henry, even Abram's mistakes were part of this bigger story about God's plan for humanity.
Exactly. It's like a reminder that the path to true worship isn't always perfect or straightforward.
Yeah, there are going to be bumps along the way.
For sure.
Yeah.
Challenges, temptations, times when we doubt.
But even then, God's grace is enough to see us through. It's pretty amazing how Henry's interpretation adds a whole other level of meaning to the story.
Yeah, it does. It's not just a historical account anymore.
Right. It's about our own spiritual journeys.
Our struggles, our choices, and how we choose to trust in something bigger than ourselves.
I'm curious, though. We've talked about faith, obedience, and grace. But there's also this theme of deception running through the story.
Oh, you're right. With Abram and Sarai and then God using the plagues.
It makes you think about truth and honesty and the consequences of our actions.
Definitely. And Matthew Henry, he tackles those questions head on.
Really? What's his take on it all?
Well, he acknowledges that what Abram did, the lying, was a big mistake. And it could have turned out really bad.
But God still used it, didn't he?
To show his power and protect Abram and Sarai.
So even though God wasn't happy with the lie, he still worked through it.
That's one way to look at it. Henry believed that God can work through our imperfections.
Wow.
Even our sins, to achieve his goals.
It's kind of mind-blowing,
It is. It's like God's ways are not always our ways.
It makes you wonder if, like maybe when we mess up, God could be using those experiences for something good.
Even if we can't see it at the time.
That's a really powerful thought.
It is. It's a reminder to trust in God's plan, even when things are tough.
This whole deep dive has been so insightful.
It has. We've uncovered so much.
And I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
We are. There's always more to explore.
But if we had to sum it up, what's the most important takeaway for our listeners? That's a tough one. There's so much here. But maybe the fact that even those chosen by God, they're still human. They make mistakes, have doubts, just like us.
And yet, God's grace is always there.
It's a really comforting thought, don't you think?
It is. So for our listener, I think the question is, if you were Abram, would you have the courage to leave it all behind?
Based on just a promise.
And what promises are you holding on to in your own life?
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it? about what we'd be willing to risk for something we believe in.
It does. And, what promises are guiding our own lives? What are we hoping for?
This whole discussion has been really eye-opening.
It has.
We've covered so much ground, the history, the different interpretations.
Right.
And it feels like we're just getting started.
I know. There's always more to uncover with these stories.
That's what makes them so fascinating.
Absolutely. They just keep revealing new layers.
And Matthew Henry's commentary, wow, it adds a whole new dimension to it all.
It really does. He brings in this perspective from the 1700s.
Right.
But it shows how these stories are still relevant today,
Like his idea about Canaan representing heaven.
Yeah. It's not just a physical journey anymore.
It's a metaphor for our own spiritual journeys.
Exactly. It's like all our struggles and goals here, they're part of this bigger picture leading to something greater.
And what he said about true worship.
Right. It's not just about rituals.
It's about a real connection with God.
Yeah. And surrendering to his will, living according to his commands.
It's a pretty powerful message.
It is. It's about being genuine in our faith, aligning our actions with our beliefs.
I'm just amazed by how powerful these ancient stories are.
Me too. They really speak to something deep inside us.
That longing for meaning, for something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, and they encourage us to keep searching, keep questioning.
To keep growing in our faith and understanding.
So, for our listener, as you think about Abram's journey, what are your Canaans? What promises are you holding on to?
And how can you strengthen your faith, even when things are uncertain? That's a great question to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
Until next time, keep exploring and keep searching for those aha moments that make life so meaningful.